Welcome to the Quick Trip. I'm Jen Rusciano, the Communications Coordinator here at the Psychedelic Support Network. Psychedelic Support is the leading directory of licensed mental health practitioners and community groups who provide mental health services related to psychedelic medicine and integration, both online and in person. And here in the Quick Trip, we hear expert answers to questions about psychedelic medicine and mental health. Joining me today is Dr. Anne Wagner of Remedy. Hi, Dr. Wagner.
Hi, Jen.
Dr. Anne Wagner is the founder of Remedy, a center for mental health innovation committed to clinical practice, research, and community building based in Toronto, Ontario. Dr. Wagner uses her training in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral, and mindfulness-based practices in helping individuals, couples, and others in intimate relationships process trauma, navigate their lives, and prepare for and integrate experiences in psychedelic and non-ordinary states of consciousness. She is one of the investigators of the MAP-sponsored pilot trial of cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy for PTSD and MDMA, which studies the impact of treating couples where one member is diagnosed with PTSD. She is also the principal investigator for the upcoming randomized trial of CBCT and MDMA, as well as for a pilot trial of cognitive processing therapy and MDMA for PTSD. She sits on the board of directors of Casey House, Toronto's HIV/AIDS hospital, and is also an adjunct professor at Ryerson University. Wow. Welcome, Dr. Wagner. We are honored to have you with us today.
Oh, thanks, Jen. It's great to be here.
Well, I would love to begin by getting to ask you about your path into the field of psychedelic medicine and therapy. What brought you into this work?
Well, I started off doing work as a PTSD treatment development researcher. So I was doing a postdoctoral fellowship with Candace Monson at Ryerson University. And Candace and her colleague Stephanie Fredman had developed CBCT, which is this couples therapy for PTSD. And we'd been investigating that in some different trials and different ways of doing that treatment. And Candace was approached about potentially collaborating with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, on a study combining CBCT with MDMA. And as her postdoc at the time, I got invited into those early meetings, and it just really captured my attention. So before that, I had really never thought about using a psychedelic with treatment. I really didn't know a lot about the background. So I quickly read up on what was going on at the time. And this was a number of years ago. So those conversations started in 2013. So before we were at the stage where we are now doing, phase 3 trials with MDMA, for example. So, I was looking more into some of the older research with LSD, some of the work in holotropic breath work, and some of the phase 2 trials that had happened with MDMA and some of the psilocybin work that had happened up to that point. And it just all was really compelling. But at that point, I was still really agnostic in terms of the potential. I didn't really know what it would mean or what it would look like. And then I got the opportunity to be a participant in a trial for therapists that MAPS had put together to give therapists the opportunity to have the experience of being in an MDMA session in a therapeutic context. And so I feel very lucky that I got to participate in that study, because it was the reason why I got so excited about doing this work. And it was, that experience for me was probably one of the most impactful therapeutic experiences that I've ever had, and certainly changed the course of how I do my own personal work. And and so it was from there that we kind of dove headfirst into developing that treatment. And it's ever since been the focus of my clinical work, my research work, and now kind of everything I do, or almost everything I do professionally. And so, that was the starting point of it.
That is incredible. And thank you for naming the role that your own experience played in your development as a clinician. I know this is an important part of the MAPS MDMA therapist training program. And is a question a lot of practitioners are asking at the moment around what does it mean for us as clinicians to have our own personal experience with these medicines to also help inform the modalities that end up becoming part of the landscape as these medicines move into the mainstream. Sounds like that was particularly impactful for you.
Yeah, it really was. And I know there's a lot of, debate as we go into broader applications. And we think that, there potentially will be a lot more clinicians or therapists who are going to be in these roles, and it's a real question mark about whether folks need to have had their own experiences. And, I'm a big believer in the fact that all doors can lead to the same place. We can get to similar conclusions. But it's a very particular experience of really going into a non-ordinary state. It doesn't have to be with a psychedelic. It can be through other means like breath work or other experiences. And sometimes people have spontaneous experiences of that, but it certainly made a big impact for me. And it's actually one thing I'm starting to work on developing with our team here, and in conversations with different groups, but the idea of trying to start a study like that in Canada, so that folks have more opportunity to have that experiential training that is legal, and they're able to do it in a research context. So we're hopeful that that will be something that gets going in the next year or two, perhaps.
That is incredible. Thank you for making that kind of healing option available. We definitely need more sources for therapists and clinicians to overlap with some of what is emerging in this field, since access isn't as widespread yet. So I'm grateful Remedy is thinking about how to make this possible. Mm-hmm. I would love to ask you a bit more about the work you've done with couples. From my understanding, in the trial that you were an investigator on, couples, one member would have PTSD, and you were exploring the impact of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy on their relationship as a couple. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could just share more about this idea of relational healing and how MDMA may be a part of a couple's healing process.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly important thing when we think about healing processes in general, but also when we're particularly when we're thinking about trauma, because it really doesn't happen in isolation. The experience of recovering from trauma, or the experience of living with what's happened in a traumatic event or series of traumatic events, or a traumatic childhood, it doesn't impact just the person who experienced it. It will have reverberations throughout that person's social network, their close relationships, their intimate relationships. So the idea of being able to do healing work with someone who is close with you can not only help the relationship, it can help both people, and it can, potentially have longer lasting effects and broader impacts as well. And the fact that it's really hard to heal in isolation. When we're healing with a therapist, that can feel less isolating. But then the idea of actually having it take place in the relationships that exist in your life outside of that it can be very impactful as well. So that's the idea behind doing dyadic or couples work with PTSD. And yeah, when we're combining it with MDMA, the idea is we're trying to help catalyze that process. So a process that we know can be very helpful for folks without MDMA, in terms of increasing communication, helping folks understand what's going on with PTSD, understanding how it's impacting them both and their relationship and how they interact together. And then when we add MDMA into the mix, the idea is we're strategically adding it at 2 points in the treatment where we think it may have the most impact. And so one of those points is, fairly close to the beginning, after folks have learned communication skills. And so they've got a language, they have a template to work with together to be able to go into deep experiences. And then that MDMA session can help start to bring forward some material that they could then be using those skills with. And then the second MDMA session, so in that trial, we did 2 MDMA sessions embedded within this couple's treatment. The second MDMA session was right in the heart of the trauma processing. And so the idea is to give that piece of boost. of being able to go really deeply and explore what's there. So that's, kind of in essence, what we're doing to combine those things together. And MDMA, as an entactogen, this idea of to touch within, it's really well suited to interacting with couples and helping with that creation of safety in the container, but also the feeling of empathy that comes along with it and an openness to sharing. And so we're really emphasizing that and as a therapist, helping to hold that so that people are able to have these difficult conversations, which are so important. We often want to avoid difficult conversations for fear that they would cause something worse to happen. But in reality, we actually feel closer together when we're able to have them and feel like we're able to move through them. So that's the idea behind it. And that's what we did with the pilot study. And we ran 6 couples through that study. We saw really compelling results. 5 of the 6 folks no longer had PTSD at the end of the treatment. And we saw gains in terms of relationship satisfaction as well. And which is very, exciting for us, especially because folks, didn't have to be distressed in their relationships at the beginning of treatment. And so to see gains in relationship satisfaction, even when you're not starting in a distressed range, that's a really nice signal and nice demonstration that it can help with growth and with satisfaction and well-being as well. And then the outcomes for the partner were compelling too, in terms of their own well-being and growth. And that was exciting for us because, we're giving a dose of MDMA to the partner who does not necessarily have a diagnosis of anything. And they definitely don't have PTSD because that was a rule out. So we're planning on taking that model, doing a few tweaks methodologically to it, but taking that and putting it into a larger randomized control trial that we're getting ready right now.
Wow, that is incredibly exciting. Thank you so much for sharing more about that. I really appreciated that you named, entactogen, touching within, that idea of, combining both the vulnerability that some of these substances may allow people to get in touch with, moving through trauma, as well as the skills and the communication practice and the therapy that provides that foundation for those more vulnerable experiences to really help folks heal. And it's beautiful that those spaces are coming up in these trials. I would love to ask you. So you've mentioned, there's a larger study being planned. I wonder what other and you've mentioned Remedies aim to have a trial that clinicians in Canada could participate in. Yeah. What other studies and trials might be on the horizon for you, for Remedy? What are you thinking about as you watch the opportunities emerge in this field?
Yeah, there's lots of ideas cooking in the background. I think the one that's the closest to execution, we've been sitting on a little bit here for the past, well, not a little, a lot for the past year or so because of COVID. So we're just waiting to launch our study of cognitive processing therapy, which is an individual treatment for PTSD that is one of the ones that's the most kind of widely disseminated in terms of healthcare systems. It's a short-term treatment for PTSD and combining that with MDMA. And that's a pilot trial to demonstrate that, we can combine MDMA with different modalities of psychotherapy, which I think is an important and interesting question, so that, when we get to the point where MDMA is able to be prescribed as a medicine, there may be a wider array of therapists who would be able to do that, given if they have training in CPT, which is many do, and also just showing that they're showing what could happen with that combination. So that's been a study that's been in the works for a long time, and we're really excited to launch it, and just waiting for some of the COVID restrictions here in Toronto to reduce. So that's the very first one that will happen. We're only running 10 participants through that one. And then ideally that will lead hopefully almost directly into the larger couple study. So I think that's a big one. I really hope to focus on clinician experiences and training, just given not only for people who are going to be, participating in doing MDMA therapy themselves, but also just as a tool for growth and experience for the clinicians, since I think one of the biggest gifts we can give to ourselves, but really to our clients as well, is to do our own work and to understand what is coming up for us and be able to feel those depth experiences. So that makes me really excited.
That is incredible. And you may have touched on this already in your last answer, but I always appreciate getting to ask someone in your position who has such a view of the field and is involved in so much. If you had a magic wand and you could make an idea, a practice, a process part of the fabric of this growing field of psychedelic medicine, what would it be? What's something that you think the field at large could benefit from incorporating?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the thing that comes to mind when you say, I think about that question a lot in general, and there's so much happening in the field right now, and I think two things really stick out for me. One is this: I've been forced to do this because of COVID and just how long things take. But if I could just encourage folks to pause, right? That we're not running a sprint right now, that this is it's a marathon, this whole experience. And I feel like the field, and especially, the kind of newer entities, experiences that are coming in are really feeling like it's this turning point, this time to capitalize on something. And it's what the psychedelic work and the non-ordinary state work asks us to do, is to go inwards, to get quiet and to sit. And I think we could all benefit from a kind of a moment of pause whenever we're about to launch into something or go full stream ahead. So that's a thing I hope for, and I try to do myself, and I really encourage everyone to think about. And then I think the other piece is this idea of trying to lead with this idea of love, and there's a oneness experience, that there's not, we don't need to be grabbing at pieces of the pie that because of this idea of scarcity or fear or needing to be best or biggest or first, and because this is not new. This information, this knowledge is not, we're not inventing it. It's knowledge that's been known for a long time and through lots of different cultures and experiences. Some of the medicines may be a little bit newer, but not all of them. And yeah, so I think those are two things that come to mind.
That's very powerful. I really appreciate that call. And I think you're touching on such an important question that folks are wrestling with at all levels. And I'm very grateful that someone with your experience is able to bring these values and these points of reflection into the field, because I think the models you're helping to develop are going to have an impact, a huge ripple effect as the field continues to grow. Well, this has been a really wonderful way to connect. I'm just dropping that if folks want to learn more about Remedy, they can visit remedycenter.ca and connect a little bit more there. And I just really want to thank you for joining us today, Dr. Wagner. We are very grateful to have you here.
Well, thanks so much for having me, and love Psychedelic Support Network. So great to be here.
Oh, thank you.